Hey everybody, welcome to Shop Night Live, the first episode of 2020, or 2020. I'm really glad to have you here. I hope you had a great holiday, Christmas. We had an excellent time. Our kids were here, and I basically stayed out of the shop for almost a full 2 weeks. Isn't that right? And so it was very refreshing. But I'm itching to get back in here, and I thought tonight we could talk a little bit about some techniques of finishing antiques. Now, this is a carryover. If you were here last time, we talked about some of the projects I had going on in here, and I'm restoring a crib for my brother and sister-in-law. Really, it's more for my sister-in-law because it was her mother's. And I think her mother actually used it when she was an infant, and even before that it was used. So it's probably pre-1900. It's or late 19th century. And anyway, I'll get into that in a second, but I want to show a couple other antique pieces that I have here and give you some idea of how to approach touching those up. By the way, happy birthday, Jerry. I saw that on there, and I hope you enjoy the game after. All right, well, whenever you get like an antique in, I've got some pretty cool stuff to show you. This is actually something I got from Pug, I think. I'm almost sure it is. This is an old trundle bed, and you know, it was... You can tell it's southern too because it's all that, just that yellow pine, and sometimes called heart pine. Boy, look at how, I don't know if you can see how tight the growth rings are here. But the first thing I do whenever I get in an older piece like this is you want to clean it. Get the dirt off and make sure you know what you're dealing with, you know, if you're going to restore it or whatever. Now, if it's a really valuable antique, you've probably all seen that Antiques Roadshow. There were episodes where they say to the person, well, you did a lovely job restoring this piece and refinishing it. Oh, thank you. And they say, well, good news is it's worth $5,000. And they say, oh, great. But if you hadn't refinished it, it'd be worth $30,000. And they'd be like, oh, like so. So that's true though. I mean, if you have a really valuable antique, now most of us won't encounter those types of pieces. I'm not talking about museum type pieces. This is actually, but I'm going to show you methods the way that would even be safe for quite a few antiques. Not for conservator of, you know, a beautiful museum piece. That's a little different animal. When I'm talking about the real antiques, I'm referring to what was known as the golden age of furniture, pre-industrial revolution, or pre-like 1840. So where everything was really done by hand, and you didn't have the mechanized machining, machine tool marks in places, and they didn't start using quicker methods. Now, the late 1800s was still a great time to buy furniture, and you'll see things that come in that are like, you're like, wow, that's a real antique. But it's really not technically, because it's a post-industrial revolution, so you're going to have some mechanization, some production element to the making of it, which dropped the value. But the bar is actually moving a little. I'm not collecting antiques these days, and I know that 18th century furniture has dropped quite dramatically in value recently, so in the last 10 years. There's something about people just losing taste for it, and the whole thing about brown furniture being no longer in vogue. That pretty much casts a pall over all wood, pretty, except for your maples and your light-colored woods. But worry not, just like bell bottoms are back, brown wood will be back. It's something about the nature of it. We know it. I mean, we just intuitively just feel the connection to the natural material. It's beautiful, and it's nice to bring out the best in it. So I am not shaken at all by that little fad. I mean, after all, in the 70s, green Formica was hot. No, orange Formica. And yeah, orange and green, I guess. And just everywhere in the kitchen and oak kitchen cabinets, remember that? Now everything's paint, and that's okay. But trust me, things will come back around again. So anyway, this is a trundle bed, and I don't know if they dated this, but this has a feel of a homemade thing. Pug, I think he said it was an antique. So this is probably before 1850. And it was an old turn bed. There's some things that give it away. I mean, these little chisel marks, those are done by hand to indicate that's the second. You just mark each post 1, 2, 3, 4 with Roman numerals using a chisel. So check out this one over here. You've got a single 1. And look at this, how this comes apart. I mean, there's not like machining on this. There's really no shoulder on the inside. That's pretty interesting. And look, you can see the handsaw marks across the top of that. See that? It's not straight across like a bandsaw. That's a handsaw. And then on this face again, you can see the handsaw marks came at this angle, and then they would have cut down this angle to the mark. And then you've got a saw cut. You can see that it's slightly overcut. I don't know if you can see it. At the base of that tenon. So this is a hand cut mortise and tenon. And then you've got the joinery. This is interesting. This is traditional, mortise and tenon construction for a bed, where you have the through bolt. That's cool, huh? That's pretty large, though. Look at how weak. They left kind of a weak amount of material there. I don't like to, generally I try to get my tenons in the center. And also I try to, they're not quite as wide as that. And I only go about a little over 1/2 inch deep because they're held in by the bolt the other way. But this one, this one is very shallow. The one that comes in this way is shallow because it gets held in by the bolt. But this one, interestingly enough, look at this. When this goes together, it actually gets cinched together by the bolt passing through the tenon into the other rail. So I'm not even thinking this was glued in. Isn't that weird? So that makes it feel really early too, before modern glues were used. Certainly, even, I'm not saying it's predating hide glue, but it does feel quite old. But anyway, I could get lost in the history of this thing. It's kind of cool. This is actually the width of it. I have the other one here. This is either the headboard or the footboard. It doesn't matter because it would actually be slid beneath another bed to get out of the way. That's why it's so low. It'd go right below the height of another bed. Usually bed rails were about 14. Yeah, so there you go. It's just over 14 inches. So a lot of those old beds had very high rails, and the mattress was up high off the floor. And you could get, the kids maybe slept in this. You'd slide it out, or the dogs. We got to get one of these. But anyway, this one I've got to restore this. If this came into your shop, and they said, I'd like it restored, you'd have to return this cross rail because it's not here. I don't have it. And quite a few of these. Now, I do have a few of these already turned. I don't even remember doing this. I think Pug might have done this, or it was in his shop. But that's really pretty simple turning. And this is in yellow pine or heart pine, as they'd often refer to it. Heart pine is actually a little harder. You see it trimming out a lot of the old houses that were built around here in New England. And for beams and factories, they would ship the southern heart pine up for the strength of those beams. And it's really sweet stuff. But we do a lot with this down in North Carolina. It was always like the secondary wood. And by that I mean, like if you built a chest of drawers, you'd have this beautiful kind of exterior that where you'd use your walnut or mahogany or your maples. But the drawer sides and bottoms wouldn't have to be that pricey, more, finer material. So it would often be something like a pine or a poplar. Like in this region here where I am in New Hampshire, we very often use poplar for our secondary woods, our drawer sides, bottoms, and backs. But I really like using white pine as well. It's a little lighter and it planes beautifully, it has a great fragrance, and it's a very stable wood. So that's another great secondary wood. But down in North Carolina, we always used yellow pine or heart pine. So this brings back some memories. It's really a sweet wood, and it's tough too. But anyway, back to after you made all your pieces, when we got this thing assembled or whatever, we'd want to restore the finish a little bit. So you'd want to clean it off. And we've got to get some of that dirt on there. You never know if there's contaminants like wax, or if anybody, waxed it up. And if you wanted to put any kind of refreshing finish on it, which I would, then you've got to get it clean so that will adhere. So let's put this one aside since we don't have the cross rail. And one of the ways I usually clean projects off is just with paint thinner. It cuts the wax and it also cleans off just about any dirt you could worry about. Now you could use a steel wool pad or a paper towel. Let me start with a paper towel. And I'm not going to do much. I just don't want to get this stinking up the whole shop. But you don't care. So let's just get it on there. And what's cool about it is once it gets kind of wet like this, you start to see the old color. And look this was clearly hand turned because you see where the gouge turned this, see that dark line going around? It's rough because when they use the gouge to get down to that point, he sort of caught a little bit. Not a bad one, but it's so rough, when they tried sanding, this wasn't even sanded actually. No, this isn't even sanded. So this is the tool marks right there, those going around from the maker here. So you're looking at tool marks that could potentially be 200 years old nearly, So it's pretty cool. This came from the eastern North Carolina country.
What are they called?
What?
What are they called?
Tool marks? What's the matter?
Well, that wasn't what you were saying exactly.
What was I saying?
Tool marks.
Tool marks. Oh, did I say marks?
Yes, you did.
Tool marks. Sorry, my Lowell mask comes out. I wasn't even aware.
We still know what you're saying, though.
Yeah. How would they say it in North Carolina? They say, right, good tool marks. No, I can't even do it in North Carolina. Can you believe that? Been down there. I know a few little phrases. But there you go. You could clean it down like this, and you can see the dirt like getting on there. It's a little bit grimy. You'll see blackness coming off here and there. So it feels like there's a little bit of finish on here, but my guess, I'm not sure what they would have used on this. I'm guessing maybe a shellac, because that was pretty prevalent in that time. But look at these guys. These are pretty dark. Now, sometimes it's really grimy, or you might have little speckles of paint or whatever, and that's where using a steel wool pad helps you to scour it a little bit while you're getting the dirt off. So I use that and just clean it down. And you really start to clean it up a little bit better. And some of this, these might need a little more. You know, you got some real age on this piece. You just want to clean it down. All right, so I'd go over the whole thing, let it dry completely, and get that off there. Look at that. See what I mean? That's scouring it a little bit more. So already we're improving the finish. That's some real grimy built-in dirt there. This is cool. This bed came from my other storage library up above the garage. So you didn't even get to see this when I brought you up in the attic. It's not, and I've got some more gems like this that I'll be sharing with you as time goes on. But look at that, just to get that much done, it's not glare to you. It's starting to get back that really nice aged heart pine color. Oh wow, I'm seeing the hand plane marks on here as well. That's sweet. Like a nice little scalloping on there. So this really is a classic. You know, it'd be nice to fix it up. I think given the width, it would have to go for modern beds. Let's see, what is it? Oh yeah, it would have to go underneath a double would be the smallest one, which is 54 wide. And then you have 61 is a queen, 60-inch mattress. So this would fit under a double bed. And, you know, you just have to have your rails a much greater height like the old traditional ones. So once I have that, let me just...
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What kind of finishes were used 200 plus years ago? Is that an easy question?
The only one I really know much about is shellac. That's been around for a very long time, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. I'm not sure when the various varnishes came in, but there are like resins that were taken from trees, sometimes roots, and they would find that they could dissolve them in some type of solvents, and then they'd become in liquid, brush on the material, they'd lay out, and when it dried, you had a shell of protection. Well, shellac is similar to that, except it's created by this lac bug, and it dissolves in alcohol. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we get there. But that's a good question. I'm going to have to read up a little more.
Michael is mentioning wax and lanolin being used as well.
Yeah, probably waxes. I'm not really sure, but you'd have more protective. A lot of them were called spirit varnishes, and that's where you had the shellac was one of the primary spirit varnishes. So, but I'm going to get on that and read up. It's funny, that's not a question that we even have to think about unless we just want to know the historical notation, because we have so many nice modern oil varnishes and lots of options to go to. So when I'm restoring an older piece like this too, this is a cool old little, actually was a rocker, child's rocker, but I think it got pushed around or dragged around so long that the rockers are almost flat. This is old too. This is another hand-turned, really nice old piece. And you can see by the indentations on the side rails that it was almost surely woven with a rush seat, because you have like almost the cord indentations of that fibrous natural material that was woven into a lot of seats like this. So none of these rails would have been seen, but these would. So this slat in this little ladder back rocker is missing, and that needs to be replaced. But you can see the peg right there. So this could probably be separated enough to get that guy out. I don't want to break it. But oftentimes you take a rubber mallet. I shouldn't probably do this right now, but I can't resist. I'm going to you just want to tap. Try to get a little movement, and then I'll try to get some movement back here. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so that middle one's coming out there. This has never been apart, as far as I know. But there you go, I got it enough to get this guy out. Wow. That's got some serious age on it too. I'm not sure where this is from. But that's some type of maple, or it could be birch, but I think it's fairly light. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's pine. Can't really tell. Oh, I'm getting off track. I want to stay on track. Anyway, let's keep talking about finish. I can see that we can do more on repairing furniture other nights. But this one has, I noticed, a little bit of what you see sometimes like white spots or paint residue. And that's where the wool pad helps. You can burnish and see it's gone. So you can clean it up nice with this. And I don't want to do this too hard because this is one of those pieces you wouldn't want to take all this finish off. Look how cool that is. I mean, that's age right there. See, if I stripped this and redid it, I'd lose the character of this. I know you'd say, oh, it looks cruddy. Oh, there's some more white stuff. So this just gently scours the surface and gets rid of that kind of stuff without hurting the finish at all. And again, you'd need to really clean up the whole surface. All right, that's enough of that. Now, once you've cleaned it up and it's dried, you can very lightly sand it. You don't want to take off, much. You don't want to take off the patina. You don't have to clean it up, really, because the color's all there. So I would use no more coarse sandpaper than 320. And this is a good piece of 320, but sometimes after I've used it a while, I still keep it because it gets almost like a rag. It gets very soft and broken down. Then it's probably technically for grit after it's beaten down and worn. It may be only cutting like a 400 plus, but it's kind of nice because you can wrap it right in around these type of turnings and stuff like that. But I would just very lightly go over this. Now I'm picking up some of the oil because it's not, the thinner because it's not fully cleaned off, dry. And then you'd hit your other. Then I'd dust it off and you'd be ready for finish. Now, what kind of finish? Great question.
Before you move on, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Would you use different levels of steel wool, or would you stay with the 4/0, or 3/0?
I would stay, sometimes I've gone more coarse, depending on what it is, but if you can get it with the finest, it's better, because you're not going to damage or take off too much. That really coarse steel wool is pretty abrasive, and you don't want to, I wouldn't want to take off and create a white spot on that dark material. That what's left of, it's like a paint. There's sort of a paint still on there, and that's really good age color. This is the kind of piece that, like I said earlier, that at Antiques Roadshow, if you strip that, they would say, why did you do that? You took off all that. Look at that. That one's really worn, almost from people's hands going over it. Look, it's even got little dents in there from whatever.
Dean says he has a hard time believing that you would keep an old piece of sandpaper.
Really, Dean? Pretty funny. I do have a problem like getting rid of them. Although, I do have fairly well organized over here.
I'm sure I've thrown away some gem pieces not knowing that.
I was looking for one of those older ones. I think I might have thrown it out, but yeah, it does. For finishing, they come in handy. So sometimes you want to save those beat down, especially the 320. So moving on. The three big finishes that a lot of people think of right away and the easy finishes to apply are oil-based varnishes. One of the easiest to apply is Danish oil. It's very thin. It's very compatible with a lot of finishes. And if you have a piece that's not so old and you just want to bring back the, like it looks dried out because in places the finish is off, once you've cleaned it and sanded all the roughness off, quite often just applying a coat of Danish oil is a great restoration. If it depends, you know, because it will be compatible with a lot of finishes, even shellac. But, you know, it'll take a little time to dry, and it also will penetrate the wood, the bare wood. It's going to soak in more deeply than something like shellac. Excuse me, I got to get a tissue for a second. Excuse me. Excuse me. Avert your eyes. I'm blowing my nose. All right, so then the second one that is really nice is tung oil varnish. And if you've been around, heard me talk about Waterlox a lot. It's very high quality polymerized tung oil varnish. And it's easy to use like Danish oil, but it gives you a step up in protection and moisture, water resistance, and it also builds a film on the surface faster than Danish oil. So if you just want that kind of close to the wood, you don't want to really affect the finish that much, what you want to use is Danish oil, right? And then the third and least favorite of these penetrating like varnishes is this varnish blend. It's a tung oil and polyurethane varnish blend by General Finishes, Armor Seal. Some of you guys have seen that. It's a great finish for a lot of purposes, but it's going to be even harder and more durable than the tung oil varnish because it's got polyurethane in it. But polyurethane tends not to look as nice as the tung oil varnish. It's a little more, has a little harder sheen, a little harder resin, so it doesn't rub out, and it looks a little glossier and plasticky. So we don't want that. Now, these are all decent options, but I would not use these options on old pieces like this because it doesn't feel like it's true to the period. So in a restoration like that, I want to use something that's doing the least amount of harm to the piece, and it's something that would have been around the period. It's something I could reverse fairly easily and all that. So for that, I would choose shellac. Okay, so we're going to set these aside.
While you're setting those aside, Ed has a question about why the cans look like a truck ran over them.
Why what?
Your cans look like, yeah.
Oh, Ed, yeah, okay. That's just because these finishes oxidize in the can. So you know how we've talked about if you put a little bit of finish in a jar like that, if I put this in there, all that oxygen in there would react and the finish would cure in the jar. And you'd have like rubber or solid finish. We've all experienced that. So there are certain finishes that will oxidize quite rapidly, and those tend to be the oil varnishes, like those three. So by squeezing the can till the level comes right up to the cap and tightening it, It's the poor man's way of preserving, or the fast, quick, and easy. But I've got other methods. A lot of times if I buy a larger container like that, I buy these canning jars, and I just pour it off into these small little 4 or 8 ounce canning jars. And if you pour it right up close to the lid and seal them, it'll keep quite well because you've left very little oxygen there. And we've talked about other preservants and methods for doing that, but that's why I crush my cans.
You should talk about the finishing class you did, the course that you did that full day that they can buy, because you talk about all of that on there.
Oh yeah, there's where's that? That's on.
It's on our website under the online courses, live online courses.
Yeah, we have a really extensive, in-depth finishing course where I talk about some of these things, but I go much more deeply into stains and finishes and all these varnishes and shellacks and preserving finishes in a number of different ways. So if you want to check that out, you could check it out on our website. It's like $20 for 5 hours.
Yeah, that's good stuff on there.
So shellac, it's really one of my favorite finishes. I'm going to do a presentation on this at Fine Woodworking Live in April, and I'm excited about that because I've been working with shellac for 30 years, and it comes through in so many different ways, and it's really easy to use, but it gives you really beautiful, traditional, or really fine finishing results. Okay, it's one of the best finishes to apply and restore an antique very delicately, so you're not building a big finish on there. Plus, you're not putting like an oil on there that's penetrating into the wood. You're actually using shellac as more of an evaporative finish. So it's a surface. It's more of a surface material. So what I mean by evaporative finish is you have the shellac, which is like a flake form usually. It comes in other ways, but primarily flakes. And you can dissolve the flakes in denatured alcohol. So let's say you dissolve 1 pound in 1 gallon of alcohol. You'd say that shellac is of the consistency, it's a 1 pound cut. That's just describing the viscosity of it, the thickness, the amount of solids you have in that 1 gallon. So it'd be a 1 pound of shellac cut to the alcohol. Now, if you had 2 pounds, 2 pound cut, and 3 pounds, 3 pound cut. So why I tell you that? Because you don't have to dissolve your own. You can buy it pre-mixed like this. And this is one of the products I really like, this Zinsser Bullseye Shellac. This is a 3 pound cut right off the shelf. So you're getting a pretty good amount of shellac because I'll never use it at a 3 pound. That's just too thick and too heavy bodied. And the clear, as I understand, I spoke to these guys a few months ago, is the same 3 pound cut. However, the seal coat version, which is just a more refined version, so as you go, as it gets more refined, it loses more and more color. So it actually starts out like a deep molasses brown, and then turns into a garnet. It's button and garnet, and then it gets to this clear, and then like blonde shellac. And this bullseye, when it gets refined to this point of seal coat or this blonde shellac, it loses the wax component as well, which is desirable if you want to use the shellac as a seal coat or as a barrier coat so that different finishes will surely adhere, or any kind of what am I trying to say? Like contaminants on the surface will get sealed in and locked in. So they get blocked or barrier coated in. That's why they call it seal coat. But essentially, it's blonde shellac refined. So the thing about to get back to the evaporative finish, the shellac flakes are dissolved in the alcohol to whatever cut you want. Then when it's applied to the surface, the alcohol evaporates. So you're left on the surface with a nice, very micro thin shell of shellac. And that is beautiful. It goes down, it doesn't build up like these heavier varnishes. And it also doesn't soak in, and it dries fast. You can put another coat on in 2 hours. You can be rubbing it out the next day if you want to go that fast. So it's a wonderful finish. You can brush it on. You can wipe it if you're really fast. The traditional method was to French polish early on, and that is a little more complex application where you create a pad, very dense pad, often with linen or tight woven cotton, and the shellac is loaded into the pad, and with pressure it's just squeezed out, and you have to keep moving because it's like imagine if you had a damp rag with water in it and you just went around and that water was going. Well, that's essentially what you're doing. But as the shellac is applied in that manner, almost instantaneously after it's off the pad, you see it evaporate. And so you're applying this micro-thin sheet. The beauty is that because it's evaporative, you can apply additional coats, later on, and they melt into the previous coat because the alcohol in the next coat is going to just soften and lay in, and then you'll have like this uniform coat again. So the same thing happens when they French polish. They keep going over it and over it. Every little swipe is like melting into the previous. So it's not like the varnishes that you have to sand between coats in order to give the next finish something to grab onto, because it's not melting in. The varnishes are reactive finishes. They react, they oxidize with the air, and they cure. When you put more finish on, it doesn't melt. It has to get attached there somehow. So that's why they usually, on those reactive finishes, you'll see it requires or recommends you sand like to 220 or 320 between coats. That's to give it somewhere for the next layer to grab onto. No worries with shellac though. You can just apply it and you never have to worry about cutting through a layer and seeing where you did that. That's for another day. I'll talk about that. But yeah, you got a question?
Can keeping the unfinished finishes in the fridge help save them at all?
Not really. It's not like that. It's the oxygen. I don't think it matters. I do see your point though, because when they dry in the atmosphere, they dry more quickly in the warm air. So it might, I never thought of putting them in the fridge. I wouldn't want to confuse them, with something else. But I don't know. I have actually never thought of that. But I would bet that it would slow it down a little bit. But the main factor is the oxygen. So you've really got to try to eliminate that in one method or another. Now,
can you just confirm that the blonde seal coat is two cut?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Seal coat is 2-pound cut.
2-pound cut.
So you pay almost the same as the other, but you're actually getting less density. But because it's wax-free, it actually has more uses in some ways. But anyway, I'm not going to go too into this, but you can brush it on. And this is a brush I was using for shellac. And one of the great things, because it is that evaporative finish, it's not cured. I mean, it's not a reactive finish, so it's tough. And you would normally say, oh, that's trash. How many times have you used a varnish brush and you kick yourself for not cleaning it out right one more time? But anyway, not so with shellac. You can just drop it into the jar of denatured alcohol and give it, about 10, 15 minutes, and it'll be soft. Now, this brush was exactly the same, but this was a shellac brush. I've had really nice brushes, and I would write an S on there, whatever, and it would always be shellac. You don't have to clean them out the same way. But look how soft this is. It was as hard and useless as that other one just, 30 minutes ago. Or right before we started, I dropped it in there. So there you go. You've got a nice brush. Now you can brush this on. Because it's a fairly fast evaporative finish, you got to move quickly with a brush. And it takes a little getting used to if you want to lay down a good finish on some smooth surface. But on like a chair like this, you could get it on there. But, when you're changing direction here, it's going to be almost unavoidable to have runs and sags and, it's dripping all over the place. So, if you're going to use shellac, I would recommend at some point getting an HVLP gun. Excuse me. Shellac is one of those finishes that's really friendly to spray. It's not deadly like, the lacquers or conversion varnishes. So, because it's alcohol, you still want to use a ventilated area, but it's not nearly that dangerous. So, an HVLP gun like this works with air pressure here, and you put in your liquid, and you spray. And we went into that on that video as well. I'm not going to go into it here, but wow, what a difference it makes when you're going to finish something like this. It takes a little getting used to the gun, like starting and stopping, but I could have this thing covered very evenly with no sags or runs in just, less than 5 minutes tops, and it would be done. So there, imagine if you were brushing that on, how long it would take. And, the same with these guys. But let me just see, like when I get to the orange shellac, usually whenever I spray shellac, a safe pound cuttage, if that's a word, to use is about 1.5. Okay, you don't want to use it. You can use it at 1. That's very thin. They often call that a wash coat. But 1.5 pound cut is thin enough where it'll dry fast. You won't have problems spraying it. You can spray it with like 30 pounds of air pressure. And it's really beautiful, great to use. Now to make a 1 pound cut, I just take my really clean orange shellac jar. I'll sift this later. And I'll just put in, you could measure all this, but why do that? This is how forgiving it is. You can, like say I just poured that in, it was a totally empty jar. I would just, eyeball it, or you could get fussy and put a piece of tape. You could measure it, but basically I want to go to the bottom of this piece of tape, right, to cut it in half, because that jar narrows a little bit. So I'm just going to pour this in. So that's about 1.5 pounds, all right? That's it. No worries. Now, I want to stir that. Think there's a piece of wood around here I could stir this with? Here's a little piece cut off of a crest rail of a chair. That'll work. So we stir that, and look at that amber color on that oak. Not bad. It looks almost like that Craftsman style. Now, for certain woods like this, this is some hard pine as well. Now I had this old piece. It's good to always test. So would I want to use orange shellac or clear shellac? Let's give it a shot and see what happens on here. I'm going to just take a little of that alcohol out of the brush.
Yes, George, we'll put the link to that finishing video in the description for you.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to, yeah. Anytime I try to mention something like that, we'll usually have a link, right? We're pretty good about that.
Would you customize the piece, would you customize the finish to the piece based upon what you know the best finish is, or would you go good old tried and true because the wood is the wood the finish works best on?
Good question. It depends if there's a color or if you're working with an antique, like you've got to get this push to that tone or color. So sometimes, or if the piece had a little stain on it, then you have to get it to that color. So I'll show you. For instance, here's an unfinished piece of hard pine. If I just put, I'm just going to put a little bit of orange shellac on there. Right? Let's take a little seal coat. So this is going to be lighter, not quite as amber, but it does have a little amber color to it. You can see in the jar, right? It's just not like, look at the difference. So it's almost clear. And then when that goes on, it's a little bit lighter, not quite as warm. You see, if I built that up a little more, you'd really start to see that orange. That looks beautiful on there. Brings back those memories. Let's put it on the rough and see what happens. Not bad. Kind of rustic. So now I would take, I would look at, here's the piece. This has the color on it already, and I'm quite light. So I know that if I finished one of these here, that's the same material pretty much, although it's already aged some, and it's got some stains on it too. I wouldn't use that one. Let's try this one. So this one's a little bit darker just from time. I'll just touch a little on there. This won't hurt. And let's see how close it comes. All right, it's pretty close, but it's still noticeably lighter. All right, so we've got to get, if you wanted to match and put this in here and not have it stand out, you'd have to get some color on there. Now, here's the question. Do I put the color directly on the wood? If you do, you're going to have less control because you don't actually know exactly what that stain is going to, how strongly it's going to react. And once you get that stain on the wood, there's no turning back. I mean, you could sand it out, but it'd be difficult. So, but there again, I wish I saved a little piece of this to test this. You could use, like here's some stain that I think is pretty close to this color. It's like a burnt umber. It is a pigmented stain, which we go into in that finishing video as well. So let me just get a little of this out, and I'll put it, it's not on the bare wood here, but let's just put a little bit on like that. There's a little shellac on there too. But see, we're getting a little closer to the color there, right? Look at that. Not bad. So let me... Now after a little more shellac, it would probably be fine. So another way to color wood with more control is to put shellac on the material first. So then you've got like this little thin skin of a shell on there, and you can put these colorants over the top of it. So I put that little bit of shellac on there a minute ago. I'd let it dry, but if in that area I brought in this stain, without letting it dry, it's hard to do this. But now look, we've got a much richer brown, and look how close we are. That would probably hide right in there. And you can tone a little bit more, like I could put shellac over this, and then I could tone it a touch more if I needed to. So that's one way to control your finishes, is to get a little barrier coat or seal coat on there, and then you can control the finish and bring it on up. All right. Well, I'm not going to do any more on these. I would go ahead and shellac those, but I want to move to that cradle and show you, once the finish has been built up, you got the color matched nicely. Now you've got to finish the finish or rub it out. We've got a question.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you use an air dryer on your compressor when you spray shellac?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do you use an air dryer on your compressor when you're spraying shellac?
An air dryer? No. I have if by that you mean I forget what they're called, but there's like a a pot in the line, like a jar, that I can bleed out any moisture. I do have a, somebody must know what that's called. It's escaping me right now, but you've got to keep the moisture that condensates in your compressor out of the line. So you have to have along the line before it gets to the gun and hose, you can drop it out, the moisture content. So, excuse me now.
Oh, gosh. They're laughing because you didn't wear gloves again. Another missed opportunity to wear your ample, generously given gloves.
I wasn't doing much. I always feel like I'm going to do it and get away with it, you know? Like, look. All right, so a little bit. You guys are right. I have used those gloves, so thank you all who sent them.
It's a water separator. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, something like that. It's, yeah, I don't know if that's the right name, but yeah, that's the only dryer type thing I have in my line. I don't have any, but you should have a good warm finishing area as well. All right, so let me show you that final thing, the crib for my sister-in-law. Now, I don't think I'm in any real danger of showing this on the video because I don't think they're big social media people, and I'm ruining the surprise. But check this out. So once you've got the shellac applied, it's going to look like this. Look at that. See now how shiny that is? It looks almost like plastic, right? To me, that's like a cheap, chintzy looking finish. And that's how shellac looks right off the brush or the gun. So this whole entire thing I sprayed, and I sprayed it, I gave it a couple coats over using a little glazing stain to tone some of these elements together. Like one of these is brand new, this one. I only know because the dent's up. That's brand new. And I just toned it in a little bit. This was noticeably lighter, so I had to add a little more color here. But this is end grain, so it's going to look darker. But once everything was finished, the whole thing came in harmoniously. And then one of these, I had to replace one of these spokes on the end. It's down the other end here. This one. So that had to get replaced. You know, it could be a little bit redder. Like these are darker red, but it blends in nicely enough. And it'd be pretty hard to notice, wouldn't it? All right, so I have actually rubbed out this entire piece except for this rail. Now, rubbing out in this case with shellac, it's a little different than, say, if you were doing a high-style gloss dining table. I'm going to use 4/0 steel wool, okay? So this is the choice to burnish and take off that chintzy-looking, plasticky look of the shellac and get it to look more aged. So I don't have a lot of shellac here. I have 2 very thin coats on there, and after I cleaned it and all that. Now, watch what happens. You can see that sparkling sort of, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to really burnish this until it looks absolutely dull. Oh, shoot. This is the one that has the thinner in it. I'm like, why is that getting wet? Let me see. I had that paint thinner still in there. I didn't want that to mess up. Show you this. But anyway, there we are. So it should look dry like that. And you may say, man, you're ruining it. Losing that color. But actually, you're burnishing, you're taking off any little dust nibs, you know, that kind of rough feeling you always get when you finish anything. You're going to have little imperfections and dust nibs. But you got to really work this and create a nice dull matte. Now doing this piece, I got to get kind of lodged in that little fillet, that little offset there, and take that sheen down. Don't worry about scouring the shellac off. You won't. It's unless you got it on there really thin. but I never worry about that. And you're just burnishing, you're doing it until you see an even, dull matte. No more shininess, okay? So let me
Watch
hit
the cord behind you. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just hitting that. Anyway you see that glaring, bright shine, you're going to hit. Now, you can see that difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
From there to there. So it looks like it took everything away. Now you can blow that off or vacuum it off. I usually wear a mask when I use this because you get the small particles of wool, but it's steel, so they usually fall, but I just don't like the idea of breathing them. So you should wear a mask with that if you're doing a lot of it. And then once you've got this entire thing burnished out like that, then comes the rewarding moment. So you can also dust it off with one of these little dust brushes. That's nice. I love this little brush. All right. And then I like to use a beeswax oil. This is a lemon oil and beeswax polish. This is by Goddard's. When I was at Pugs, we used to use this stuff called Finish Feeder. And it was from down that region. I don't know if they still have it, but we buy it by the case. And it had a great smell because it was like turpentine based, was in there too with the lemon oil. But this is a little nicer to put on a child's bed. But it's all going to pretty much evaporate. And you'll be left with just the beeswax. So let me just put a little bit on there. You could put it on the rag. And so what happens is you see the color comes back. But it's different. It's really refined and soft, like a soft glow. Look at now when that I'm trying to get it so I can't see what you're seeing. But compare the glistening of here with that soft sheen. It's so nice. I mean, this is what we would always go for. It just makes you want to reach out. It looks warm and it's aged, but it's been restored. It's like back to life, to a beautiful color. So this is what I would do to that trundle bed. And that little chair, I'd probably go really light. I'd probably just put seal coat on that. I don't want orange up that chair. And just one or two very thin coats, and then I'd burnish it out. And I'd be happy with that. But that is a beautiful finish. Now, when I get that on this entire thing, I mean, all of this that looks kind of dead here has been rubbed out. So it was a little time consuming to do all these little turnings, but what a beautiful effect when you're done. When we used to rub out this material, and Billy Frazier, the guy he was a deaf mute in Pug's shop, and man, could he rub out a piece of furniture. He was intense. But it takes you got to really go at it, you know. The temptation is to stop before you're done. If you still see that shine, glaring, you got to hit it some more. So then when you hit it with the beeswax, it gives it this luster and appearance that's just so beautiful, and it really looks like a fine quality antique that's been very well cared for. And it has, because you restored it. Now you can use other waxes like this, brie wax. This will give you a very similar effect. But for something like this, that's being a cradle, I don't really want to use this. This is a little more intense of a wax. However, I do use this on most of the fine pieces I make, like other furniture. It gives you a really nice sheen as well, and it is pretty easy to rub on without streaking. You really can't use this stuff on I don't use this on a dining top, but, well, actually you can on some smaller tables, but sometimes when you have wax in the finish like that, it's hard to apply without streaking. But on something like this, lemon oil beeswax is the kick. I'm going to look up that finish feeder and see if they still have it. If it's still for sale, I don't know. I think it was Virginia or somewhere down there had it. But that's good stuff too. That's beeswax, and it had some turpentine. So people would always say, "Oh, that smells so nice." We'd buy it in cases, and quite often if we delivered a really nice, a bed, the question you always get is, "How do I care for this?" Well, every year or so, you could apply the finish feeder. It's not something you have to put on a lot. So, what's that?
Just back up for me a little bit. I'm running out of space to walk here.
Okay.
I have a question from Rick.
All right.
I hope I read this right. Okay. He says, I use 4/0 steel wool and wax when I finish my fly tying station.
Yes.
Is that a good idea after finishing with shellac?
Yes. That's what I'm talking about here. This is shellac. Yeah, that's exactly the technique I just went with. Okay. So I'm burnishing this with 4/0 steel wool. I must not have said that. 4/0 steel wool and then wax, and you'll get that beautiful luster. So you're way ahead of this. You don't even need this. So I'm excited to get this little last bit rubbed out and the wax on this, and the entire thing will have that soft kind of antique luster, and it'll look like it's still old but brought back to life. And I even made some slats for it, which I hand planed out of some old heart pine. It didn't feel right putting something new in there, and these will go right in, and they'll support the mattress for them. So this is super strong material, and it'll be a great addition.
Alan looked up the finish feeder. They're not selling product anymore.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. Rick is asking, would you recommend Johnson paste wax?
Yeah, most paste wax do about the same. Yeah, I'd try it. Paste wax is just a little more difficult to apply on stuff like this. If you have a liquid wax, it goes on easy. However, if I'm trying to accentuate the depth, I don't mind using paste wax, and quite often I'll use it with colorant. This one has an antique mahogany, so it's kind of dark. And some of that gets lodged in the cracks, and it actually looks like age, But in this piece, I didn't really want that. I already got the age. It looks great. There's no need for colored wax. And the easy application of the beeswax, I just love that luster. It seems like with that wax, I get a little brighter sheen, and I actually prefer it to be knocked down a little bit. But still, it's just such a quality finish, and it's so easy to spray because it's shellac, but you get like this. I mean, if you saw that, you'd say, wow, you'd think it was an oil varnish or something. But it's not. It's just a beautiful, fast application of shellac. It's great. Look, it's not dangerous to spray. You can spray, and it's quick drying. It's great in so many ways, and it's so traditional. So I hope that helped. I did want to say, just in closing, I was also wrapping up that Craftsman Dining Chair. It seems like that's been a big part of the last year. I didn't think it would be, but we had that as part of one of the episodes on the show, the TV show, and it ended up, I actually scaled that and tried to simplify that chair, and I wasn't that enthused about it at first, because I'm used to 18th century furniture with all the curvies and all that. But it's grown on me, and when we did the finishing article, they decided in Fine Woodworking they wanted to do an article on that as well. So some of you saw that we talked about that in a previous Shop Night Live. Anyway, I'm putting that away. I'm kind of done with it. We shot an entire video series in depth of making that chair. So it's almost like, I'm not thinking of myself a pug, but it's like being in an apprentice environment where you're watching somebody not skip anything and talk about little tips and tricks and jigs and fixtures and why this first. It's really, I think it's a great way to do it. And we recorded it as kind of like a live stream or a live feed like this. So I'm very prepared. I don't have many, it doesn't even need that much editing because of the way we were ready with other things to move on to other things. But I think it ended up being about 10 hours right around 10 hours of walking you through making chairs. Now, I wouldn't say start with that. If you're new to woodworking, don't start with chairs. They're actually one of the more challenging because of the angles and, there's just curves and some of the compound joinery that can be involved. But I would start with a shaker table, like a tapered leg table, get you into joinery, comfortable with how to handle materials and hand tools and things like that before you jump into that. It can be frustrating if you jump too far too fast, but definitely you could take that on. We also have like the full-size drawings of that chair. I did this in the early summer as well, I think. We shot these, maybe it was last spring. So we've got that chair recorded. You can get full-size drawings and the entire video series for like less than a tenth, or about 1/10 of what it would be if you came and took a class here. And it's actually, you can go back and watch the video as much as you want. So it's pretty cool. But this is the chair that you keep bumping into. Sorry. This is the chair. It's really turned out to be it's one of my favorite chairs now to sit in, I think because of the way it's upholstered. We have the one that was finished in the house now. But it's a great white oak chair, and we applied a finish to it like this. This shows all the steps of staining, and this I went through in that finishing video as well. But this was part of the article for Fine Woodworking that I gave them all the steps that we used. So that article, you can also refer to that if you want to get the finish. That was a couple issues ago. If you're not a subscriber of Fine Woodworking, it's well worth it. And then we've got, this is the upholstered seat. So we go into that in the article as well, how that was constructed. Not so much, I don't actually do my own upholstery, but I'm tempted. I now have a nice staple gun, and it's not rocket science, right? We could do that, but this goes on top, and it's a super comfortable chair. So anyway, that's my 2 bits. That's going to go away, but I just wanted you to see it before I store it away and let you know that it's available if you're interested in tackling the challenge of making your own dining chairs in 2020.
Fred Floyd, who took many classes with us last year, says he's getting lots of compliments on his set that he made.
Very nice, Fred. Yes, I was quite impressed with how quickly you took that on and how fast you really got them done. Because they are a challenge, especially with a large set. It can feel almost overwhelming, like you're never going to get to the finish line. But you did, so congratulations on that.
Okay, Bob has asked, could you use Carnauba?
Carnauba?
I'm sorry, Carnauba.
That's okay.
Wax? Is that
yeah, Carnauba tends to be, you don't need a wax it that hard. If it's in the wax, sure. Like I have some wax back here that has Carnauba in it as well. But it's not necessary. It'll give you a little brighter shine. It should work fine, but I'm just partial to beeswax because of that sheen you get. It's just beautiful, and it's such a thin, elegant, and natural material, as is the Carnauba, but the Carnauba tends to be a finer, harder wax. If you got it, try it. If you like the sheen, go for it.
I think that's all the questions.
All right, so hey, we kicked off the new year in style. We're excited about the year. We've got a lot of great things planned, but I'll release those to you as we have them ready. So, Happy New Year. I'm really glad you spent this time with me here in the shop, and the camera lady, as always, doing her amazing work behind the camera. But thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Shop Night Live.